over the years of working in practice management, you learn a few tricks of the trade. You can spend many, many years working and learning the tricks of the trade, or you can take a shortcut. And hopefully what we're able to do for the people that we train is to give them the benefit of all of our years' experience and give them that shortcut into ways of really getting a lot out of their practice. As we go through tonight, let me just give you some insight into experience and some examples and ideas from the way that other people do things as well. When they first introduced the idea that CQC registration was going to be a requirement, a lot of people, first of all, hid their heads in the sand, didn't they? And, oh no, it's not going to happen, it'll never happen. Well, let's go back a little bit in time and think about what the CQC is and what it's trying to achieve within healthcare across the board. And if we were to go back right to the beginning of the noughties, we'd be looking at three very high profile and very shocking cases where healthcare professionals did not do the best for their patients. The first one, and probably the most shocking of them all, although they're all pretty bad, was Harold Shipman. Can you remember that all being in the papers? That there's a GP here that is actually selecting his patients to kill so that he can inherit from them. And that is shocking and it's appalling. But what's even more concerning was that he wasn't on his own in that practice. That there were other GPs who must have noticed that Harold's patients were dying off much more quickly than anybody else's. The next case that came to the fore was Bristol babies. I mean, if you had a baby that was born with a heart defect and it needed surgery, if that surgery was carried out at that particular hospital, the chances of the baby surviving were minute compared to anywhere else. It could have been with the babies that the surgeons weren't particularly competent, or it might not have been that at all. It might have been that there's some fault with cross-infection control. It could have been anything, but the fact was they carried on operating, they carried on putting babies at risk. And when that all came on panorama, of course, it was all very, oh my goodness, everybody was, well, why hasn't anything been done to stop that? And then there was another one at Alderhay. This was about consent. This was about when people had died, the transplant coordinator would go to the family and give condolences, and then would say, well, some good can come out of a bad situation, because what we can do is we can harvest body parts either for transplant or for research, so that in the future people can get some benefit out of this sad situation. What they were actually doing was taking virtually everything, and the people that were burying their loved ones were burying virtually nothing. And then what was happening to the parts that they'd harvested was that they were being kept in labs until they were no good for use anymore, and then they were being incinerated. It was just one thing on top of another on top of another, and the government were in the position that they were going to have to do something. And what they first decided they would do, and this was across all the healthcare professions, was to insist on clinical governance measures. And I'm sure you've all got clinical governance measures in place at the moment. But where clinical governance didn't do particularly well was that there was nobody going into the practices to check that the clinical governance was being properly followed through. If you're a health service practice, you'll probably have someone from the PCT check. If you were with one of the big plan companies, Denplan or Practice Plan or one of these, you may have had somebody from there checking their patients for being well looked after. But on the whole, in many practices, it wasn't being followed through, which meant that in some practices, they were doing absolutely everything correctly. But in other practices, they were doing absolutely nothing. Now, in 2008, the Health and Social Care Bill was passed, and within that were all the regulations that we now know as the CQC regulations, the standards that they set. And now, not only are the standards set from the regulations, but somebody is going to go into each practice to ensure that, one, you've got the policies, and two, that the policies aren't just something that you bought off the shelf, but something which you look at on a regular basis, you assess and you check that what's happening within your practice mirrors the policies that you put in place. And let me tell you that the practices that are doing this well are getting so much benefit from doing it. The practices that are doing it badly are getting nothing from it because they're not putting anything into it. Who is it that within the practice can make the difference between making regulations work for you and the patient? Well, it's the practice manager or the practice management. So that's where we are now. Over the years, we know practices that are getting masses from their CQC. So customer care is one area. Management and leadership. You'd be amazed how many practices have got no leadership. But ultimately, the whole umbrella for the whole thing that we're going to be doing, of course, is quality management. And what does that mean? We've heard that word so often now. Quality management is sort of embedded into our psyche. But what is it? What does it mean? And how do you make it work for you? Making people feel comfortable and understanding what they've come to you for. That's a very big part of what customer care is about. If you think back to somewhere that you've been a customer and you've walked out of that particular place and thought, never, ever, ever am I going to walk through that door again, you'll probably find that there's just 3 or 4 different things that have happened that have made you feel that way. Leadership is about saying, this is what we're here about, this is the sort of practice we are, and then setting training and setting all sorts of standards so that people can excel, so people know what's expected of them. Define your services as opposed to those of your competitors. Do you think it's important to know what other practices are doing? Looking around other people's websites and seeing what they do is a very, very important customer care measure, because if something that's working beautifully there can be introduced in your practice, that's good for everybody too. Design your company image. Just imagine that you're sitting in a restaurant having a meal. And it's one of those sorts of meals, those restaurants where you've got people sitting almost quite directly behind you, you know, with the booths. And then as you're eating your meal, you just overhear the name of your practice from the people that are talking behind you. What would you like to hear them saying about your practice? And what would you think, oh my goodness, do they really think that's about it? With having standards of customer care that are purely down to the individual person on the desk, is that it becomes inconsistent. A lot of practices are starting to use treatment coordinators now. So any of you use them in your practices? And the thing about a treatment coordinator would be that the dentist would do an assessment and there would be a treatment plan, and then the coordinator would explain the pros and cons, the benefits, and exactly what the patient's choices were. And very often patients will say to the treatment coordinator, that was amazing, nobody's ever explained it to me like that before. And they'll say to their friends, you know, that practice there, they're amazing, they really do explain things to you. You really need to go there. And their friend will come along and they'll probably get very good treatment, but they won't get that standard of treatment that they've been promised, and they'll be disappointed. So from that point of view, if you have a standard of customer care that's delivered in the practice, it needs to be consistent. It needs to be the same for each patient that comes in through the door. What quality management is about really is setting the standard and then enabling people to meet that standard. And certainly as far as giving your company a particular image is concerned, consistency is the most important thing. To state the obvious then, what is customer care? Well, people that teach customer care will tell you that customer care is about creating warm, fuzzy feelings. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, smile. So the sort of smile that you give just needs to be genuine, really. And some people aren't smilers. Call the patient by name, but don't wear it out. Give your individual attention to make sure that the patient in front of you feels that they're important enough to get your attention. Show interest. Show that you respect your colleagues. Be calm and confident. People are nervous at the dentist. They don't want somebody who's all stressed out because the phone keeps on ringing. So the secrets of good customer care is to focus on the customer. What do they want? To have good people skills. So you've got a sense of how to treat people. To know the business of dentistry or whatever business you're in, to really know that business inside out. People will ask you questions. Make sure that the sorts of answers that you're giving them show that you know and you care about the standard of care they get. In fact, basically, when it comes to setting out your stall as a practice, under-promise and over-deliver. Outstanding management and leadership. And let's just have a look at the relationships we've got here. In many practices nowadays, you're starting to see the practice owner thinking about themselves and presenting themselves as a practice director. And there's a good reason for that, because the role of the dentist within the practice is very much the same as the role of a director in a bigger company. If you think about some of the most high-profile directors that we see on a regular basis, we're talking about the likes of Richard Branson and Alan Sugar, etc., then you start to see people who have vision and create the image of the business of the practice. They decide what the practice is going to do. What sort of a practice are they going to be? Are they going to be health service? Are they going to be private? Are they going to be high-end? Are they going to be NHS? What sort of a practice are they going to be? Because again, that decision is the responsibility of the director. And the other thing that is so important with the director is that they're accountable in law. They're going to be the registered provider with the CQC. They're going to be the person that's responsible for protecting patients' data through data protection. They're going to be responsible for virtually everything that goes on in the practice. But they're going to also have to, as well as being responsible, be very tied up and busy in doing the business of the practice, in producing the dentistry. And so they need somebody to work with them in the manager role. They're going to be the team leader, they're going to be the go-to person within the practice. So all of these areas of management, when they run smoothly, it enables the director of the practice, the leader of the practice, to do their dentistry. There are a number of different leadership styles actually, and I think anybody that's worked in the workplace, any workplace, for any length of time will have seen all sorts of different ways that people can lead. These are the sorts of things that we'll look at in some depth and will enable the people that come on the courses to actually create a leadership blend that is right for them and right for their business. So basically, leadership in particular and management are about vision. It's about knowing where you're going and where you want to be. They're about communication, that is talking to, sharing with, being a part of. It's about delegating. Have you all got leads within your practice? You have your decontamination lead, but have you got any other leads within the practice? One of the other leads that you should have if you're NHS will be an information governance lead. If you're not NHS, then you should still have somebody really that's looking after the information governance. And a child protection lead. Operations, that's the management, the practical day-to-day running, and all of this needs to be people-focused. Solution-focused approaches mean that when things go wrong, instead of finding somebody to blame, and lots of people do that, don't they? Solution-focused management recognises that there's a problem, but then thinks about, okay, well, this is what we don't want. Let's put our energy and our time into defining what we do want and planning the route from where we are now to where we want to be. It focuses on what you want to achieve. Now that's important. Again, this is a technique and a process that is incredibly useful for managers because you don't have to go through the whole process of deciding who's at fault. So problem solving is about perspectives. It's about, how bad is it if something's going wrong? When you recognise those approaches in people, then when you have got things going wrong, you can choose who you get involved with problem solving based on what you perceive to be the best approach for that particular problem. And the final secret that we're going to talk about tonight is the secret of quality management. Give you a bit of a history of quality management. It will put it into a context for you. In the 1930s, a statistician called Edward Glenys went along to the chambers of commerce and the various business communities in America and said, I've got a way that people can run their businesses that will be revolutionary. You'll never look back if you let me introduce this new way of thinking into businesses. And they were, okay then, give it a try. And this was in the 1930s and the early 1940s. And he went into businesses all across America with these principles, and they failed. Then there was the Second World War, and if you can remember the history of the Second World War, that the Americans nuked Japan, and it meant that Japan, who before the war had been a very rural economy where they'd grown their own food, were no longer able to do that because the land was radioactive. So Japan had to find a new way of feeding its people. And because it couldn't grow its food, it would have to buy its food from other countries where they could grow. The only way that they could do that would be to manufacture and have things to sell so that they could get the money to buy the products from the other countries and trade with other countries. So the Americans, because they were the victors in the war, had the responsibility of enabling the ordinary Japanese people to survive in this nuclear wasteland. And what they did was they sent in prefabricated factories with machinery, and we know historically that they made Japan into the strongest industrial nation in the world. Now, alongside all the machinery, they sent Edward Glenys. The Japanese actually hail him as almost a god, because they consider that the principles that he introduced, which were exactly the same ones that didn't work in Japan, in America, were the ones that turned their nation into such a successful one. And really, if you think about even today, there are so many Japanese companies that have got a real stakehold in the manufacturing market, haven't they? In America, they were sending people in to a workplace where people were doing something that they'd been doing for years, and they were saying to them, don't do it like that, do it like this. And the people were thinking, but I'm happy with doing it like that. Why would I change what I'm doing when I'm really happy with what I'm doing? And the resistance was coming from the fact that people didn't want change. Whereas in Japan, what was happening was people were going from being rural workers and they were learning something totally new from scratch. And if you look at your CQC policies, what you're going to see, they all open up with, this policy aims to ensure that the people within this practice are working in a safe and healthy environment, something in that way. But that is what the practice sets out to do. That is what would say a policy is effective. It does what it sets out to do in its statement. The other thing that work systems and policies have to be is efficient. So the way that it achieves those results has to be efficient. And there are many ways that people can work that can be very effective but totally inefficient. So if you decided you wanted to get 300 patients into your practice next week, if you were to put an advertisement on the television in the ad break of Coronation Street, chances are you would get 300 people phoning up to make an appointment at your practice. That would be effective, wouldn't it? But the cost of doing that would by far outweigh any money that you could earn from bringing those patients in. So those were two of the principles that he got people to measure within the way that they worked in America, where they didn't take on, and then in Japan. But the other thing that is important is that it is about continuous improvement. And it doesn't matter how good a thing is, the principles of continuous improvement are the principles of quality management. Because as needs change, policies need to change too. That's why you need to audit the policies in your practice on a regular basis to make sure that they are still effective and efficient. And that really is what quality management is about. It's about knowing what's needed, creating the systems, and then working together as a team. So each person needs to have a role. They need to want to do that role. They need energy, enthusiasm, fairness and consistency. All of these themes go through all of the secrets that we've looked at tonight. The basic principles of making things work really come from these quality principles. One of the students that followed Denning was a man called Schuart, and he set the quality circle, which is the audit circle which the CQC is going to expect to see in the policies within your practice. And within this, it means, first of all, you actually find out what needs to be done, what needs to be changed. Then you make the plans to make it happen. You do it. And that's not the end, because then you study it, you look at it very closely. Is it working? Is it effective? Is it efficient? Is it a quality improvement? That's your audit. And then you move on to the next cycle. So once the changes are in place, you then go back, you review, you plan, you do, you change, you check. When the CQC do their next round of checks, if they see that practices have got their policies that haven't been audited with that cycle, then they're going to pick you up on that. Hopefully you've been interested to see some of these secrets, but if you want to know more, these are all available as full-day programmes. They can be taken as workshops, they can be taken as home learning, they can be delivered in practice, and I think a lot of the training that I've done in practice with these sorts of subjects mean that we can actually focus in on that particular practice and make sure that we're not talking in general terms but very particular terms about a particular practice. We also have some BTEC qualifications. Okay, it's a very forward-looking way of making sure that the skills within the practice are cascaded through the practice team. Very effective, that is. There's management at level 3 in an award and a certificate, and there's management at level 4 in a diploma format. All of these are the sorts of qualifications which at some point in the future it seems pretty likely that the CQC are going to be asking for managers and leaders within practices. Okay? So if you are interested in any more, here are the dates for the 4-day workshops there. The dates for the management courses aren't absolutely set in stone yet. They will go ahead without a shadow of a doubt, but the dates will have to be finally confirmed. Another course that we are offering is a course in NLP and hypnosis. It's a course which is for the whole dental team, especially any nurses that are interested in smoking cessation and those sorts of ways of working with patients that help them to deal with the sorts of things that they're trying to work through. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, is a very, very powerful technique for enabling people to take control of things that they don't feel that they're into control with. So that's another course which is on our website. If you're interested in full details on any of our courses, do visit the website.